I recently had a complicated situation. I ended a relationship of years, really the only relationship I've had in my life. At 18 I went to live with my boyfriend, and from that moment until 24 everything was fine, or relatively fine, but since last year problems arose and, well, everything ended a few months ago. My apartment was actually his apartment. Everything was in his name. He bought all the furniture. When I left there, I had nothing. And my friend Regina saved me. Not only did he give me his friendship, but he opened the doors to his apartment. He let me stay in his room for several weeks until I recovered, and he was there for me all that time. I don't exaggerate by telling you that I appeared every night in pajamas. He stayed in the room with me for a while. We watched movies. I talked to myself every time I felt sad, and I didn't stop until I looked good or until I fell asleep. I noticed something that she did when I fell asleep. I know you can say that I didn't notice it when I was asleep, but it was something I noticed before I fell asleep completely. At that moment, when you're between sleep and wake, my friend touched my hair. I stretched it with my fingers, and then I walked to his room. That's what he did for several days, and then I started to feel something else. I stretched my hair, yes, and then I kind of bit it, like I put it between his lips. I don't know how to explain it, but at that moment I took it as a sign of affection, like a kiss before going to sleep. Maybe it was her custom. In fact, I was a little sorry to ask her, and also I didn't feel it with bad intention. I felt loved, pampered. As the days went by, I also began to notice that I woke up without my socks on. Surely she took them off when I fell asleep, before going to sleep. Even one day during breakfast I told him that I liked to sleep with my socks on. He didn't say anything to me. And I thought I hadn't paid attention because I kept waking up without them. But well, then something happened. Something that is what makes me share this story with you. Regina had a lot of work at the studio and came out late. It was 9 at night when she called me to tell me that I was not going to come to dinner, that she would make me something or order from outside. That's how I did it. And then I put a movie waiting for me to fall asleep, waiting not to think, not to feel sad. When I was falling asleep, I felt my fingers again running through my hair. Then, how they bit him. This time I even felt the heavy breath of someone, and then they pulled my socks and the steps were directed running to Regina's room. I could even hear how they knocked on the closet door. It was a moment of confusion. A moment when I was afraid to open my eyes, when I thought it was all a dream, when Regina had arrived and I hadn't realized that I had fallen asleep for a few seconds, but no, not because I started listening to Regina struggling with the lock as always when she arrived, taking off the 3 she had put on and then entering, apologizing for leaving me alone and for arriving like this and waking me up. I turned to look at my feet. I no longer had my socks on, and I could still feel those fingers there, in my hair. I could feel them, I could feel that breath. I had a panic attack at that moment. I tried to explain to my friend what had happened, but I couldn't. After a while, I calmed down and told her. I told her what I thought had happened all those days before, and she told me that she had never touched my hair, much less that she had taken off my socks. She checked her room. We checked everything, the closet, but of course this time we didn't find anything. Luckily, what happened coincided with my move, but she assured me that she had never had a paranormal experience in her apartment, although she did believe in the existence of all that. Months later, she told me that she found her neighbor in front of her in the parking lot. They got up together. He lived right in front of her. He confessed that his 4-year-old daughter. He said that in Regina's apartment, not only did she live, but a young man as well. He described him as 1.40, extremely skinny, without hair, and with very black skin, as if he had burned. The girl's parents thought it was strange that her daughter had the imagination to see something like that, but they didn't give her importance. And at that moment, perhaps going up and not having anything else to talk about, the neighbor told Regina. Perhaps it has nothing to do, but Regina is terrified by the idea of thinking that what I lived has something to do with that. Imagine, let's hope, the girl who lives in the apartment in front. I write to you to tell you a couple of anecdotes that happened when my father died, 17 years ago. At the time of his death, my father was relatively young, he was 56 years old, so his death took us by surprise. He had never been hospitalized, except once when he had an accident when he worked as a bus driver. He even used to go out cycling regularly, so he was in good physical condition in general. The day he died, he was alone with my mother in the house that my mom still lives in today. They had finished lunch. They were watching television. Then he told my mom to check, because he heard a bird flapping in the kitchen. The house is not big, so the kitchen is attached to the dining room where they were watching TV. Reluctantly, my mom went to see and told him that there was nothing, that he was imagining things. This is what happened a couple of times more, and a moment later he asked her to go see, but this time because he heard water running like a broken cane. My mom went to check and found that absolutely nothing strange was happening in the kitchen. They continued watching the TV, until at some point my mom said something about the program they were watching and he didn't answer. She turned to see it. My dad was having a heart attack. It was then that she, desperate, went out to ask for help from the neighbors, but by the time they got to the hospital, my dad was already dead. My mom told this to the family members who went to the hospital. She told it during the funeral and she still tells it to this day. Almost everyone who listens to it coincides that. The whistling that my dad heard. It could have been death that was coming for him, but the strangest thing wasn't that, but something that we had to live, experience for ourselves. My most adult family, my grandparents and my uncles, are very religious, but my closest family, my parents and my brothers, were not practitioners of religion. Even my father and I declared ourselves agnostics, and he had asked expressly that when he died, there be no mass or anything religious, no prayers, not even during the funeral. I tell this because, at the time they were going to close the coffin to go to the cemetery, a neighbor started to pray the rosary. We did not try to prevent it because it did not seem bad to us. It was his way of presenting his respects. At that moment I left the place to take air and my brother-in-law was on the street, preparing the car in which my father worked as a taxi driver until one day before he died. We were going to go to the cemetery. Great was our surprise when, at the same time they began to pray, all the locks of all the doors of the car closed suddenly. There was no one inside the car and this one didn't have electronic closing either, so there was no way that would happen. They were manual. We immediately related what happened to my father, who must have been angry because his will was not being fulfilled, but no one wanted to tell the ladies to stop praying. It seemed very rude to us. They did not know the beliefs of my father or his will, and they were doing it with good intention. The thing is that we were trying to open the car, but the key didn't work. They brought the keys of other cars and neither. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I swear by my daughters that when they finished praying the rosary, all the security guards got up alone, in broad daylight, with no one inside the car. Another related event was that a neighbor told my mom that one night when she left to say goodbye to a visit, almost in the morning, he saw something like a man dressed in a dark suit and a hat, who couldn't be seen in the face. But he was huge. He was huge and he was looking through a kind of window, that here in Tucuman we call a ventiluz, that is on top of the garage door. He was looking inside my house. The craziest thing is that at that time no one knew who Slenderman was because creepypasta didn't even exist. But years later, when I came across that story on the internet, I realized that it was exactly the same as what that neighbor described as she was looking out at my house, a few days before my father's death. The story I want to tell you, in reality, did not happen to me. It happened to the parents of my best friend, quite serious people to be joking or inventing things to attract attention. They are in fact an older couple who like to travel and explore corners of Mexico and the world. They spend all their time and savings in this stage of their lives, traveling and eating in delicious places. And on this occasion, when what I am about to narrate happens, they left the town where we live towards the sea, specifically to the beautiful beach of San Blas, Nayarit. Their plan was to eat with a couple of friends and spend the day on the beach. Maybe go home at night. Maybe. They, already retired and with adult children, didn't have any hurry, and so they spent the day, eating and enjoying the beach with their friends. Entering the night, and without anything that prevented them from finishing with their weekend escape, they decided to look for a hotel in the town to spend the night and start the way home until the next day. They arrived at a very nice and quite old hotel in the center of San Blas, whose data will not be specific to not give bad publicity, since it does not deserve it. Apparently it was full. My friend's father asked the receptionist for 2 rooms. "Good night, miss. We would like 2 rooms, please." The receptionist, a little overwhelmed by the apparent jitteriness that had just happened in her shift, answered almost annoyed, as if waiting for her to be rejected by her only available room offer. "Well, I'm only free at 15 and 16. He didn't say anything else. Without giving any further explanation, he only kept an eye on the response of his guests. "Well, we're asking for 2 rooms, and he has those 2 rooms free. Of course we love you." My friend's dad obviously didn't see any problem. They said goodbye at the entrance of their respective rooms, already exhausted by the day, and each couple went to sleep. During the night, without being able to sleep deeply, something worried my friend's dad. He only calmed down when he turned to admire his wife sleeping peacefully by his side, and then, suddenly, something caught his attention. Someone. He had to rub his eyes to corroborate that what he was seeing was real. In front of the mirror in the room was a woman. A woman quite young, looking at the mirror, dressed as a bride. And then he moved. He walked through the room without stopping in them. He didn't stop smiling. The Lord did not feel fear. He is a man with a long and quite conscious and awake life to the inexplicable situations of this world. He only gave him a prayer for that spirit or projection or whatever he was seeing that could reach peace and rest. He closed his eyes, he squeezed them as if he wanted them to disappear, and when he opened them again, he could clearly see how this woman crossed the wall without any problem, making it clear that it was nothing that could be explained as natural. The next morning, to not alarm his wife or his friends, he did not comment on what he saw. He was not going to do it. They all gathered at the hotel restaurant to have breakfast before taking the road to their homes. The first to touch the subject was, however, the wife of her friend. "I don't know if I was dreaming at night, but I swear I could see a woman in the room. She was dressed in white and it seemed to me as if she was crossing the wall towards her bedroom. I tried to wake my husband up, but by the time he did, he couldn't see anything." My best friend's dad just smiled. And then, yes, he also encouraged himself to talk about what he had seen. He felt confident. There was no longer the risk of him looking crazy or that he was making up stories. Some hotel employees were already very aware of his talk. Of the tenants of rooms 15 and 16, to the extent that they even approached and asked in a slightly moody voice how their night was. They were able to rest. Both people commented their experiences without seeing any reaction of surprise in the staff. We told them that only those 2 were available where the bride-to-be appears, they said, as if it were obvious, but no one had warned them anything strange about it. How could they have known? They insisted that they were not the first to have reported that strange event at the reception. The employees showed them a room, a place where they found different photographs of when that place was not a hotel, but a house of a very wealthy family. There they could see her, in a photograph, that same young woman dressed as a bride. They pointed her out immediately, and with sadness, they told her how a legend tells that she was murdered the same day she was going to get married, and that is why she still wears her dress, still trapped in that happy moment, before her wedding. They returned to their homes with a story to tell to their children, and even to people like me, who have always caused me tremendous curiosity, everything inexplicable, everything mysterious. That story is real and it happened in Nuevo Leon, in Apodaca, in 2004. A lot of very strange and ugly things have happened to me, and today I tell you the one that I consider the most traumatic of all. With it I hope you will be encouraged to tell when something happens to you. With that I would feel that I have the goal fulfilled. I lived in that town, in the Los Evanos colony, and this happens when we were moving from home, there in that same colony. The new house was in a corner and in front of it there was only land with a mountain. The first night we started moving things, we didn't finish. I had to stay in the new house with the things we could take. I stayed with a friend, Roberto, who helped us. Since we didn't have a bed yet, we spread a mattress in the living room and we spent a while talking and remembering adventures. The house had a porch and a balcony. This railing was down. We had to load it, drag it from one side to another so that it would open, and that's when the bad night began. The house was very strange, it imposed. It was like a horror movie. 2 floors and well, without furniture and alone, it was even more scary. My friend couldn't sleep and told me that he wanted to go to the bathroom, but the one downstairs didn't have water. However, there was no light upstairs. I told him just take the kitchen light. I saw him very doubtful of going up, as if he already felt that something was waiting for him up there. I know he was afraid and I told him in a gurgling tone that if he wanted I would accompany him. But he just laughed and went up. I went back to bed. I slept for about 20 minutes, and it was when I heard the barge dragging and the door opening. I got up immediately and saw my friend running towards the avenue. Even though I talked to him, he never turned back. I closed the house and went to the other one with my family. I explained what had happened, and my dad complained to me, thinking we had taken something. I assured him that I didn't. I told him that we only had dinner and that was it. The next day we just took things and settled in completely. There we lived, my parents, my 2 brothers and me. In those times, strange things happened to me from the previous house in and of itself, but I know that that place was more than cursed. A few days passed and my mom told me that strange things were happening to her at home, that things were moving, that the doors would open on their own. The thing would have stayed there, but in those days I had a walk to an estate with several friends, and in that event I would meet Roberto, my friend, the one who left me alone that day at home. I tried to talk to him, but he seemed to avoid me. He just told me that he saw a shadow in a room upstairs. A shadow stuck to the window and that when he came down he didn't see me, so he left. I didn't believe him. I knew there was something he wasn't telling me, but I just limited myself to telling him that he was probably afraid. Just making fun of that. Here I must clarify that at the hacienda we were looking for strong experiences. There were ghost stories told around the area, and for a moment we felt that we were hearing something. A friend was very dumb, and he even started to challenge the demons or whatever was there, and at one point we wanted to see the silhouettes of a lady from afar. Just that. When we finished exploring, we had decided to go to my house, have a beer, but after what we lived, only 2 friends accepted. The others went to their houses. One of these friends was Roberto, perhaps enthralled by alcohol. We were all drinking. I, out of the blue, wanted to play a joke on him, and I told my other friend that we were going to scare him, that he would follow me to the game. We got home. We started drinking and talking about what happened to us in the hacienda. When we heard how the railing moved, I looked up and it was open, but no one entered. It was weird, but nothing had happened. Roberto went into the bathroom and it was when I told the other boy to hide, that we were going to scare him. I told him to make noises as if he were going to enter and I would tell Roberto that he was in the bathroom upstairs. When Roberto left the bathroom, he asked for the other boy. And in that, we heard the balcony again. Again. I tried to seem scared, thinking about the joke we were making, and opened the door and Roberto was behind me. What we saw in reality, we will never forget in life. Where the railing ended, there was a bar of about 2 meters high, and I swear by my children, there was something behind the bar. Something that showed only the head above it. Something huge. Something horrible. A monster literally with horns and a deformed face like that of a horse. A demon. Roberto and I were petrified. We couldn't move until that creature started moving its head from one side to the other, supernaturally fast. And it was there when we jumped back and screamed. The other friend came out crying from the kitchen. My dad came down and started asking what the hell was going on. I explained to him and he didn't believe me. He thought we were just drunk, so he went to sleep without helping us. My friends were in shock. They didn't know what to do and we just started praying. Nobody was going to believe what we had just seen. They didn't want to leave until it was day, and while the hours passed, Roberto finally told me why he had left that first night of the house. He told me that when he went up, someone tried to strangle him. Someone or something put their hands through the window and tried to strangle him. And he says that he shouted at me, that he tried to wake me up, but that I didn't react. A few days passed. I was still trying to overcome that night. I remember that. We were the majority of the family on the lower floor. Only my dad was in his room upstairs. My other sister was visiting in. I remember we were watching Big Brother. I remember with that attitude. I'll never be able to forget that day. My brother went up to the second floor without telling us anything. He just went up. Nobody. He didn't care. A few minutes later, my brother-in-law wanted to go to the bathroom, but the one downstairs was busy, so he went up too. Not even 2 minutes passed when we heard screams, furniture moving, my father screaming. I went up the stairs and in the first room, in the window, my brother was with a belt on his neck. My brother-in-law tried to hold his feet, and my father tried to talk to him. My mother fainted when she got up, and my sister and my brother-in-law screamed and cried, and I was just standing there with tears in my eyes. It makes me very sad to remember it. My brother was younger than me, and I can only say that evil exists, that I had never told this story in other groups. Only my close friends know what happened in that house, and I know that if they hear this story, they will remember those days because they lived it with me. There have been more things in that house. I went to that room. Yes, I know that somehow what we saw had to do with what happened with my brother. I just want to share my experience so that they know that evil exists, that it is out there, that it is close to us. So that they never say or challenge those energies by saying, until they don't see it, I don't believe it. I'm going to tell you a very short experience of my grandmother that happened just a year ago. In her room she has a door that opens to the street. The glass that the window of that door has is polarized. You can see from the inside out, but from the outside in you can't see anything. One early morning at 2:30 in the morning, my grandmother couldn't sleep. He was walking around on the bed, so he decided to get up and walk in his room. At some point he heard the dogs barking at the neighbors, almost at the end of the street. His street crosses with another that reaches the river that crosses my entire city. My grandmother didn't find it strange. Dogs used to bark like anywhere else, so he just sat on the bed listening. The dogs barked and howled. Closer and closer, as if something was approaching. Climbing our street, a neighbor 3 houses up had 3 French poodle puppies that usually walked in the street, and they also began to bark and to cry as desperate. My grandmother even thought that someone had hit them. She quickly looked out the window, which is polarized, and saw a woman, without shoes and very thin, with extremely white skin. She was curled up, with her arms like a skeleton. She hugged herself as if she were cold, a cold that suddenly flooded the house of her grandmother. What was very strange to her was that she had long hair, black, very black, braided, and she had it braided over her head, which made it look quite big, tangled over her head, as if the mummies were tangled in bandages. She couldn't see her face, she couldn't even see her eyes or her mouth. It seemed as if she had no face. The dogs barked very closely, and that thing couldn't pass. She moved from one side to the other looking for where to continue her way. The dogs surrounded the woman who without flinching only stuck to the wall. My grandmother says that for a moment she thought about to open the door, to help this girl, but something inside her stopped her. Something told them that that thing was not a woman really, that it was not a human being. When the dogs left her for a moment, that figure turned back and went down the street again, and bent down the street that was the river. When my grandmother told us, we explained to her that it was her decision not to open the door. We told her that for some reason she could never see her face and that perhaps, when my grandmother opened the door, she would have shown her face for real. I was quite afraid of her experience, because I had never heard anything like it. If anyone has seen something similar, I would really like to know her experience. Hello everyone. Today I will finally dare to tell you about this experience. It's been months since it happened. I have been thinking for months about sharing it here in the Facebook group, but I always regret it at the last moment. I don't know why there is some shame, especially when one always says not to believe in the paranormal and then lives it. I live alone with my daughter Julieta. She is 7 years old and is a son. She is the most important thing in. Okay, here is the edited text, removing the unnecessary conversational elements and structuring the narratives as standalone stories. Story 1. The singing woman. I am a mother and I do everything for my daughter. All my effort to get ahead is for her. Her father has never cared about her, so it's as if he doesn't exist. Though we struggled at the beginning, hard work has paid off, and now we are in a good position. I've even been able to get her into a paid school. I feel like there's nothing worth more than investing in her education. The apartment where we now live was rented to my uncle by a couple of older adults for many years. When the lady died, one of the children came to take the gentleman, and they never took the furniture. They never came back. My uncle left the things that served, the large furniture, like the living room set and the refrigerator, and when months passed and they didn't contact him, he left them there for the next tenant, in this case, for us. It was a stroke of luck because my uncle offered it to me like that and I didn't have many furniture. Everything seemed to fit perfectly, but then, as time went by, I began to notice something in this place, an energy difficult to describe. Sometimes when my daughter and I watch TV in the living room or I help her with her homework, we hear a person, a woman, singing. No other sound comes from the neighboring apartments, so we can't identify what it could be. Without saying anything to her to not scare her, when I hear that voice, I start walking around the apartment trying to find out where it comes from. The only time I thought I was close to finding its source was when I heard it clearly coming from the bathroom, like from the tub, as if there was someone in there. I remember that I opened the bathroom door and the sound stopped. The curtain that was facing the tub was closed and I didn't dare run. I felt that I would find something behind. Something that could change me forever. But I gathered all the courage I was capable of and opened the curtain. There was nobody behind it. Nothing. When I returned to the living room with my girl, we heard that voice again. Like if there was someone in the bathroom again. We began to suffer from manifestations that were increasingly difficult to ignore, but I tried to hide them from my daughter. I always gave her explanations that I did not believe, but it was to maintain her tranquility, her peace, so that she would not feel scared in her own house. My daughter had her own bed, her own room, but she always sleeps with me. Always, since we got here. It's like a habit. I sleep touching her head, caressing her, and she grabs my fingers with her little hands while she falls asleep. Even though she sleeps here, she's very independent. She gets up to the bathroom and to drink water without waking me up. She's not afraid. She doesn't even turn on the light to not bother. But I always feel when she gets up, and I hug her again when she comes back. That night she had fallen asleep with her hand on my finger, and I could barely feel her when she got up. I opened her eyes and saw her walking, all small, heading to the kitchen. We always slept with the door open. I hoped to hear her drinking water, but I guess I fell asleep again. And I only felt her when she fell asleep with me, and she recharged me as always. And I put my hand on her hair. But that one didn't feel like his hair, lacy and long, no. He felt wavy, old and short. In that I felt my fingers taking my hand, as she did, but they were thin, wrinkled and hard fingers. I screamed very loudly without being able to contain myself, and pushing that thing with my arms, I managed to jump off there and fell to the other side of the bed. My daughter ran into the room, turned on the light. Crying, I wondered what was going on, but I couldn't regain my breath to calm her. There was no one else in the room with us, but I knew that what had just happened was not a dream. Of course not. That night I told him that we had to leave, and I was driving around in the car until he fell asleep. Then I had to talk to my uncle and tell him what was happening. Evidently, no one else was there. He believed, but he told me that if I made myself feel more at ease, I would tell the parish priest of the church to go and bless the department. I don't believe that much in those things, but I accepted. Worse could not be. It seemed that things had calmed down, but it's strange. Every time I proposed to write to you, to share my experience with you, at night I was on the verge of death. I know that there is a scientific explanation, and it is the only thing that keeps my heart at ease for the moment, but I don't know what else to believe. I hope it's all a coincidence. Story 2. The Cursed Disc. This happened to me one Christmas in Ecatepec. My family and I were gathered together, and they sent me to the store to buy a few things that were missing. It was about 11 o'clock at night, so I left and headed to the nearest store that was still open. There was a person being attended to, and as I waited, I saw a man on the corner approaching. He was an older man, about 70 years old. He was dressed all in black, with a jacket and leather pants, with military boots. As soon as he saw me, he spoke to me with great familiarity. He said, "How are you? It looks like you like all these waves." I just smiled at him and said yes, and I decided to ignore him. I only said yes because I wanted to give him the plane. I didn't even know what he meant by all those waves. Then he said to me, "Come, I'm going to give you a gift. You look very good. You are my disciple. I know you like all this and you are going to appreciate it." And then he gave me a compact disc, without a cover or anything to indicate what it was. I accepted it for not being rude. I thought the gentleman could be a musician and it was some record of his band or something like that. When I was leaving, he said, "But put it with your whole family, in your house, so that everyone can enjoy it." And then he left. After this, I bought what we needed, and when I was going back, I began to feel a great weight on my shoulders. It was a very strange feeling, because with each step the sensation increased, as if I was about to fall. When I got to the door before entering, I thought that this feeling came just after accepting that disc, and somehow I began to make sense of everything that man had told me. Next to my house there is a vacant lot, so I decided to throw that thing there, and, believe it or not, as soon as I did, as if by magic, that weight was gone. I ignored all this and continued the evening with my family, celebrating. But the next day, I woke up with a very strong pain in my neck. Because it lasted a week, I hadn't thought much about that matter, nor had I commented on it with anyone, until I went to spend New Year's with my girlfriend's family, and I told her and her cousin about this event, and they both told me that, very probably, that object had something negative in it, perhaps an invocation or something similar, and that is why the man insisted that I put it in my house when everyone was gathered that night. I can only tell you that you don't accept anything from strangers. It may be something else. We never know what intentions he is coming with. Story 3. The church on the hill. My grandmother lives in one of the oldest colonies in Tijuana, one of those that are between the hills, of which one does not know how it was that they built it. A few meters from her house, the street is a church of a religion I don't know. It's a very small church that looks more like a big house, made of wood. We hardly go to my grandmother's house. She always comes to visit us, but recently I met some friends from high school. I hadn't seen them for a long time, and one of them, despite being 20 years old, had become independent, and invited us to his apartment. I was with them and I told my grandmother that I would stay with her that night. I was in her same colony. She told me that she would leave me the key where she always did. After 12, I said goodbye to my friends and they took me to some streets. It is not the safest area to walk at night without knowing anyone. Suddenly we met a group of kids, but they knew one of my friends, luckily. They kept talking and I followed my path. Having greeted him, there was no one else to get in with me in the squares that I was missing to get to my grandmother's house. It was a dark, lonely, quiet night. The music of some party was heard very far away, perhaps on the main avenue. In those streets, not even the dogs barked. Then I began to hear a murmur. A group of people, like whispering. A murmur that came quickly from behind me. I stopped. I looked around, but there was no one. Then I heard that same murmur, but now from the front, as if it had happened to me, but I repeat, there was no one. I didn't understand. I hurried away. I felt sorry to return with my friends and asked them to accompany me the rest of the way to my grandmother's house. Just when I was about to arrive, I heard those voices again, now clearer. They were praying. I looked up and saw some figures in front of me, at least 7 or 8 women, covered up to the head like with a blanket, who were walking and praying and heading to the back of the street, to that church. I ran the meters I was missing to get there with my grandmother, and to my surprise it was open, and she opened the door for me. She always sleeps at 9, but I had expected her to wake up. I asked him what was going on and he told me that he just didn't like the street when you heard the murmurs. Just that. He didn't say anything else. He didn't answer me when I asked him why people would go to pray at church at that time. In the morning he gave me breakfast and I got ready to go home. I had a lot of things to do so I left very early, at 7 in the morning. To my surprise, when I went out into the street, I realized that the church was closed. It had bars, tables in the windows, and it looked abandoned for a long time. The bars had chains with spiderwebs. It was evident that it had been months since someone had entered there. I will never understand what I saw that night. And it's not something my grandmother wants to talk about. Story 4. The darkness in the closet. When my mom was still alive, and I was about 6 years old, I started to feel observed in our own house. This was one of those 2-story houses where the bathroom and the bedrooms are on the 2nd floor, and downstairs, just at the beginning of the stairs, we had the room of the rubble. That's how we called a room without using where my dad had his tools and tools. Then there was the living room and the kitchen, but I tell you I had to go through the door of the room of the walls first. Whenever I went down at night I had a hard time going in front of that room to get to the living room and then to the kitchen for a glass of water. It was always the same. When I got to the lower floor, the room of the rubble was open. I would go down cautiously, and I would stop right on a step before going down. There I took courage and ran to turn on all the lights because, although I did not see it, I could feel that something was watching me from the darkness of that room, as if stalking me. In the corner, hidden in the black of the night. It may have been just my childhood imagination or the natural fear that is given to darkness, but I could not pass through that room when it was open without having to run out to turn on all the lights, because the feeling that something was watching me was tremendous. The certainty, to put it in some way, that something was watching me in there. I was so afraid of the dark that I even thought I was seeing a teddy bear with red eyes that was peeping through one of the corners of the kitchen window spying on me. But why would a teddy bear scare me? You may ask. And no, that was not what scared me, but the idea that there was something that was moving by itself. A simple teddy bear toy possessed by something, and that it was out there, watching me. I always had that idea until one day I told my older sister what I saw at night. She showed me that supposed hotel with red eyes was just a plastic bag where we kept the roche to hang clothes. The imagination of children flies very easily, doesn't it? There I discovered that I didn't have to be afraid of the darkness, that there was nothing that there wasn't in the day, that everything was as it should be. I could already go down and get to the kitchen without turning on all the lights on the first floor. I had already lost the fear of the darkness of the house. It was not until I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. The reason for writing to you the first of several unexplainable events throughout my life. My mother had not died much since she died when I was 7 years old. One day we were my dad, my sister, and I in the house. My sister was in the kitchen because she had just come down to prepare something to eat. I was with my dad in the bedroom watching a television program. We always watched TV before sleeping. In that, my dad asked me to throw the dirty clothes we had in the room in the pile of dirty clothes. We put this pile inside the closet of my sister's room. Don't ask me why there, since I have memory, we always put it in that place. I remember with that attitude. I'm 100% sure what happened. I left that room with my clothes and went back to my sister's room, since they are adjacent. When I entered that room, I did not turn on the light, because that need had remained behind before I turned it on, because I had already overcome the fear of the darkness without mentioning that I had both arms occupied with the pile of dirty clothes I was carrying. I did the same thing as always. I went into the room, opened the closet, and dropped the dirty clothes in the pile that was already in there. But when I turned around, I swear to you that someone or something, took me from my waist and pulled me in, and I felt clearly some big hands, like an adult, cold and thin, grabbing me by the waist and pulling me in, as if the darkness wanted to swallow me completely. Everything was very fast, but I felt it as if it had lasted several minutes. When I realized that I was not imagining it, it was at the moment when, instead of falling or sitting on the pile of dirty clothes, they sat me down on a bench. When I fell from the bench, I felt that I had fallen on my legs. As if someone was sitting there, on dirty clothes in the dark. At that moment, when I felt my knees instead of a lot of clothes, my heart almost came out. I just felt a lot of fear. I felt really in danger, and I immediately leaned out, and I clung to all my strength from one of the doors and the wall, so that if something or someone took me to the dark, I got up and left. I ran out and yelled at my dad with tears in my eyes that someone was hiding in my sister's closet. My dad, surprised, immediately got up and turned on the light in the room and started looking everywhere, but there was no one in the room or in the closet. I was very nervous and crying, telling him that someone had taken me from the waist and had put me there. And at that moment my sister came up the stairs, asking what had happened, why she was so upset. My father, with some incredulity, seeing that there was no one in the room and being an incredulous and strong-hearted man, told my sister what I had told her, but also that I had not found anyone. After a few looks between them, she hugged me laughing and told me that it was she who had scared me, that she calmed me, that she was just playing, but the truth, although my parents always instilled in us that ghosts do not exist. I could never believe that it had been her for a simple reason. When my dad left my sister's room, I saw when she was coming up the stairs. And neither my dad nor I moved from the landing outside the rooms. From the moment I was able to leave the closet until my sister arrived, no one, absolutely no one was on the second floor except my dad and me. That's why I always felt it was impossible for her to have been in that room before me. Since then, I've been afraid of the dark for a few more years. Imagine a 11-year-old boy turning on all the lights in the house to get to the kitchen, and that when he turned them off, he had to go up in a hurry to get to safety with his dad and his sister. Years later, as a teenager, I was talking to my sister about childhood anecdotes. I touched on that topic. She confirmed what I had always suspected. She confessed that although she didn't remember very well what had happened, she probably told me to calm down, but she was always in the kitchen. What she thought was that it had been my mom, that she had gone to give me a last hug. Frankly, I doubt that night who was in the closet was my mother. And I think that if it had been her who sat me in her lap, I would not have felt that imminent danger, as if I were going to lose myself in the dark forever. No. No. What I felt that night was the darkness. The darkness at its peak. To devour me alive. Story 5. The Man in Black on Rio Ebro Street. I happened to find a video about the ghost girl about the Angel of Independence. After seeing it several times, by the map they put and how little you can see in the images of when they passed by there, I realized that the street is Rio Ebro, in which some uncles lived for a few years. A street that I know well and where I can assure you that quite strange things happen. I, however, did not know the story of the girl, but I had to witness things, let's say macabre, there. We used to visit my uncles about 3 or 4 times a year, and I always liked to go with them. I got along very well with my cousin, who is practically my age. In those visits, from lunchtime and even before dinner, we spent it together, my cousin and I. I've always liked ghost stories a lot, but not her, at all. So this wasn't a theme we used to play. On one of those visits, they sent us to the store for something I don't remember, just before it got dark. I was surprised that it is a quiet street, almost without traffic, which is completely opposite to the surrounding streets. I never saw other people outside. Already in the afternoon, we walked down the sidewalk. My cousin, always happy, always talking, at that moment walked in complete silence, without saying anything, looking only to the floor when walking. I got a little distracted. Distraught. As I passed a gate, I felt that someone was looking at me. I turned and inside a door, there was a tall man, looking outside, looking at me. I couldn't look at him carefully. I was a little scared, maybe sad. For some reason, I couldn't hold his gaze. My cousin was already several meters ahead. He didn't get upset because I was going to stay behind. I asked him to wait for me and he hurried. He ran to get out of the street and turn around. I ran after her, but before I got to the corner, to finally get out of Rio Ebro, in the penultimate house, I saw the man in black again, in a coat and hat, standing in a specific place that hid his face in the shadows. I reached my cousin in the store. I wanted to tell her what I had just seen, but she didn't let me. She asked me not to say anything until I got home. I tried to joke with her, to distract her. We walked to another store to look for something we didn't find in the first one. And he relaxed a little. When we returned, he no longer thought about what had just happened, about the man he saw. Somehow, he had come out of my head. We were almost back on this street, and there he was, in the corner, standing on the bench, watching us. My cousin was pale. We turned around and surrounded the whole apple at full speed to get to the house on the other side of the street. I remember that she ran and I couldn't follow her. Before entering her house, I could see him again. There he was, about 50 meters away, standing right in the middle of the street. I wanted to talk to my cousin about it, but he insisted on not mentioning it. From what I could understand, for the little he said, she did not believe in anything supernatural, and for her, this was just a mysterious man who caused her a lot of terror. I did not know what to say. I do not think she has been my imagination. It was many years ago, but I tell it just as I remember it. I'm sure there was the man in different houses in a matter of seconds. I told my mom, who later told my aunt, but I no longer knew about it. The topic emerged again until years later, recently. My uncles already live in another house, and sometime in one of these visits after dinner, something led us to talk about when they lived in that department of Rio Ebro. I would be short of time to tell you the stories my aunt told us about what she took to talk to her neighbors. One of the reasons why she decided to move is because right in the front door, in the window that was facing the kitchen window, there was a girl who always watched her in the afternoons when my aunt was trying to prepare dinner, watching her night after night with a strange and sinister smile. My aunt had a cold shoulder when she told us that, When she told one of the neighbors about this, she told him that the house in front of her was only inhabited by an elderly lady who could no longer walk. The supernatural stories along that path are common and, I repeat, it would take a long time to write to you everything my aunt told us that night, but you will realize if you manage to talk to the neighbors. I wish they could do it,